Merry Christmas and welcome back to another episode of RNT Fitness Radio, where today I'm going to go through the top 20 things I've learned in 2019. As the year winds down to an end, I've had more time to reflect on what I've accomplished in the year, where I've gone wrong, and what I've learned. It's been a year full of highlights, from growing the team from 5 to 13, writing the first draft of the RNT book, getting absolutely shredded again, traveling 10 in 10, and I stopped at 10, and I reflect on why I stopped at 10 in this podcast. There's been a lot that's happened this year. I've also learned a ton, from the importance of clarity, the power of solitude, and how even old mistakes will always come back and bite you later on. I say this at the end of every year, but it's been fun looking back and seeing how much life can change in 12 months. So without further ado, let's dive into the top 20 things I learned in 2019. I hope you enjoy this one. So welcome to my second solo episode that I've done on RNT Fitness Radio. And today I wanted to go through the top 20 things I've learned in 2019. This is always one of my favorite articles to write every year, and I've done it now for 3 years running. It always gives me time to think, reflect, analyze how the years went, what I've learned, and what I should take forward into the new year. So this time I wanted to also do it in a podcast format. And I've also linked in the show notes. I've linked the article for you to read if you haven't gone through it as well. But what I want to say before I go into it is, and I say this every year, is it always surprises me just how much you can develop and move forward in only the space of 12 months. And I feel like I repeat that every time I write this article. But it is crazy how when I reflect on the year at the end of at the end of it and around Christmas time, I always look back and think, wow, a lot can be done with the right focus and the right work ethic. So without further ado, let's dive in. I'm going to go into the same order as the article and elaborate where I can on some of the points and also just discussing them and seeing hopefully if anything relates to you or if there's anything you can learn from, that would be awesome as well. So just let me know. I'll be keen to know which learnings you've had in 2019 and if any of the 20 I go through today are relatable for you. So let's kick it off. Number 1, I'm not invincible. So while this list isn't in any particular order, I'm going to sit here hard pressed to think of a lesson greater than this one for 2019. It's forced me to reevaluate many of my daily habits, decisions, and methods of operating while also creating a level of self-awareness I didn't previously have. So many of you may know, if you've read my Quarterly Insights Part 1 of 2019, that in February, after weeks and months on end without a break of going at 100 miles an hour, I collapsed twice. And what's interesting as I reflect on the episode of collapsing is that I distinctly remember having a conversation with my mum a few days before about the concept of being invincible and whether it's possible to continue at the pace I was going at. Now, clearly, I got my answer sent by the universe, which told me that no, I am not invincible. So this was a big lesson for me in the year. And while the actual event did force me to initially change my behavior, it wasn't enough to help me understand and manage my own red line just yet. And in the 6 months following, I had 3 near episodes where I felt all the typical build-up symptoms I tend to have. But I never, thankfully, repeated the actual collapse. So now I'm much more aware of when it's coming and the symptoms I get personally. And having spoken to a few other people, they've also said that they get something very similar when they're approaching that red line. And for me personally, it's my legs start to ache, I become dehydrated, and my body temperature goes up. Now, the dehydration thing is really interesting because what I find is once the legs start aching, suddenly my need for water just goes up tenfold. And I find myself drinking like 6-7 liters and I'm still pissing gold. And there's no other way to really describe it, in that no matter how much water I drink, my pee is just yellow, and I just feel constantly thirsty. And it's a really interesting symptom to have noticed, but I'm assuming it's just the body going into its shut down survival mode, and just being chronically dehydrated. So that's been an interesting observation. In fact, when I was when I did first collapse and I had tests done, and they said that it came from dehydration, and I obviously knew that wasn't really the case because the amount of water I drink. But I think what's happened is, as a result of not managing my stress cup, essentially, and not managing my self-care in all aspects, emotional, mental, etc., that my body just goes into dehydration mode, which is what triggers it. So that was good finding to have. And also to note, not only do I notice these build-up symptoms, but on each occurrence I've had that, I've made a passing comment a few days before it happens, either in my journal when I'm writing in the morning, or to a close friend that I'm approaching the red line. And each time, frustratingly, I still thought I was okay and didn't act on it until the symptoms were crystal clear. So throughout this, I've realized that I had this ability to continue pushing in any endeavor while ignoring all my body's signals telling me to stop, back off, or switch lanes. In business, it's my ability to work non-stop. In bodybuilding, it's to throw myself into continuing on extreme deficits with no real breaks, no real refeeds, etc. And all that ends up happening is I flatten out, I experience extreme fatigue, or in the worst case, I lose a little bit of muscle mass. I experienced that this year with my photo shoot prep, in that I was probably ready 3 weeks before, but I just continued to push. And I don't feel like I brought my best look on the actual shoot day, and I don't think it came till maybe 10 to 14 days later. And even though I fed up into the photo shoot, meaning I reversed the calories up and started eating a bit more, I don't think it was anywhere near enough. And I didn't take Ben's advice of backing off it enough. And same thing happened in 2017, in that I didn't take my coach's advice at the time to back off earlier. And I just wanted to push because I associate pushing with doing it properly. So there's something to be said there for next time I diet down, to really back off, because I've learned that my physique can handle a lot of punishment, but it won't present itself the best if I don't back off. So this ability has its advantages, because I can be very, very productive in my work, and I can take my physical condition to new levels each time. But I've learned this year that the downsides are super clear and very dangerous if I'm not careful. It's interesting, I had this conversation with one of our coaches, Ivan, as well, who has a similar ability to block out all his body's signals and just continue to push. And for him, it's staying extremely, extremely lean. And when I was staying extremely lean after my photo shoot, I was just bouncing ideas off with him. And he has a very similar mindset in being able to block out any potential symptoms that he may have in the pursuit of staying super lean. And after my own shoot, I stayed pretty much shoot level for about 8 weeks. And at that point, I realized that while I'm doing great holding this body weight, it's not actually serving me in the gym, because my strength isn't going anywhere. My energy levels aren't really where they should be. My sex drive is low. I've still got too much of a food focus. So while being very, very lean was helping, well, not really helping. Well, I was wrongly said. While being very lean was aesthetically pleasing and a cool thing to hold on to, now that I'm six kilos heavier as of recording this today, and 3.5 months post shoot, I feel much, much better. My strength is coming up, and my feedback mechanisms and feedback markers are where they should be. So that's another thing to learn, is that I need to make sure I don't adopt that single-mindedness without reflecting on my body's feedback when it's telling me something isn't right. So that was the first learning. I'm not invincible. The second learning is finding my balance and boundaries. So with each episode, I've implemented new rules and habits to help manage the red line by creating my own form of balance and boundaries. And I emphasize own form because I don't necessarily believe if you want to push forward in any area of life, you can have quote unquote a traditional balance. That said, I am learning that you can do the small things while exponentially improving your overall state of being and preventing you from tipping over the red line. So finding my own balance and boundaries has come from creating spaces of solitude, recharge, and low stimulus into my days and weeks. And the 3 game changers have been no work after dinner. So while my brain, this is another thing I've learned, is while my brain will always be on and always firing, I won't work in the traditional sense at my laptop after dinner as I've done for years on end. The second is unplugged walks. So every day for 30 minutes, and typically on the way to the gym, I'll go for a brisk walk where I'm not plugged into anything. So no podcasts, no music, just me and walking around. And typically I try and walk around in nature as well when I'm doing that. So that's helped a lot. And third is something more recent, which is what I'm calling my weekly 22. And now what I've started adopting in the last few months is taking Saturdays predominantly off, except for a 45-minute blitz. I take most of Saturday off, and it's now giving me a deadline to work towards on Friday. So on Saturday, it's all about family, friends, recharging. In fact, one thing I've done, one thing I've done recently, which I haven't done for years, is not setting an alarm on this day, which is a revelation in itself. Because it always shows just how sleep deprived I am during the week, which I'll comment to more later on in how I've actually managed to reduce that over time. More recently, I've been experimenting with no screens at all. So from Friday evening to Saturday afternoon for 22 hours. And the reason it's 22 hours is so I can stay within our company 24-hour client response time policy. But for 22 hours, I will go off all screens. And this means no TV, no reading on my laptop, no phones, nothing. And it's taken my recovery time to a whole new level. While it's still early days on exploring this weekly 22, I am going to continue with it because it's been another revelation. And it's shown me just how much more time we have and how reliant we are on screens. And I've talked about this in the Quarterly Insights Part 2, where I did the digital detox in Koh Rong, where I went off screens for 3 to 4 days. But to do this on a weekly basis is going to be really interesting to see the impact it has. I was inspired by a book called 24/6, of which I've recorded an episode with the author, and I'll try and link it in the show notes as well. But I highly recommend reading that book because it talks about the idea of taking 1 full day unplugged per week and the benefits it has. She calls it a tech Sabbath, but it's something that I think a lot of people can implement in some form. And what's really cool about her story is she runs her own company, she's got kids, and she makes this tech Sabbath all about family, doing family activities. And she gives a lot of practical tips on how to implement this in the quote-unquote busy times that we live in. So definitely recommend reading that. And I'm actually recording a podcast with her next week to discuss her strategies on this and how to practically implement it into your lifestyle. So stay tuned for that episode of Untitled Fitness Radio coming soon. So those 3 things have really helped manage my digital health. And coupling the above 3 rules with my daily staple of no phone use before 11 a.m. has formed a huge part of a solid digital health plan that I've been able to sustain in the latter part of this year and going to continue going forwards in 2020. Number 3 is the difference between quality time and energy. So this year I learned the difference between spending quality time and having quality energy for your loved ones. Now, it could be argued that they're the same, but I thought that the simple act of being available and turning up meant I could provide the same energy as I would for the business. And I got this one completely wrong. And what started happening was that I was making time for the people that I wanted to be with, and I was meeting with them, but I was turning up exhausted with no energy to properly engage. And while I wanted to interact, all I could think about was crashing into bed and falling asleep. Now, this came to strong light when journaling in Amboseli Safari Park with a good friend of mine, Rushab, and we were reflecting on areas of our personal lives we could get better on. And the idea of quality energy with loved ones continued to come up, and it formed the common theme of the journaling session. And since then, through implementing some of the strategies I've already spoken about and some of the ones I'll come on to next, I've managed to actually stay up past the 8:30 p.m. on a Friday night, as opposed to just crashing on the sofa, and being more present in building my most meaningful relationships. So this lesson has actually transformed into a big win for me personally, and it's something, all the strategies that I'm using to improve the quality energy will be going forwards in 2020. Number 4 is the hidden power of sleep. Now, to improve my quality energy, the biggest catalyst has been my sleep. So I always thought I slept well. The reality was I'd forgotten what good felt like. I thought sleeping 6 to 7 hours a night was enough to perform at a high level. But for the past few months, I've been deliberate in getting a full 8. And what a difference it's made. My productivity, energy, and overall well-being has gone through the roof. And when I now have the odd night of only getting 6 to 7 hours of sleep, I'm shocked at how bad I feel. Especially because at the same time of increasing my sleep hours, I also went completely cold turkey on all caffeine. I was habitually consuming every morning, and ultimately without thought. And I've never been a big coffee drinker for years. I mean, the typical personal trainer, if you know any personal trainer, they pride themselves on how much coffee they drink, because as a personal trainer, you're so sleep deprived. When you wake up at 4 a.m, you get home at 10, 11 at night, you're running on fumes most of the day because of the unsociable hours. And so you're hammering coffee all throughout the day. But what's funny is when I was a personal trainer for 5 years, I never once drank coffee. It was only when I started delaying my breakfast time, I started using coffee more in my day, and also during periods of dieting. But when I was dieting, so say, for example, in 2014, in 2017, when I did those hard diets, I only used caffeine for the fat loss period. And then as soon as the fat loss period finished and I started consolidation, I came off all caffeine. But when I started delaying my breakfast and using more of an intermittent fasting approach with my food, that's when I started getting reliant on having coffee in the morning as a way to keep myself full and supposedly help with the benefits of focus. But I found I was starting to become reliant on it, and the idea of being normal was linked to having caffeine, and I was associating having coffee with energy for the morning and having focus in the morning. So I wanted to get rid of this association. So I literally woke up one morning and decided to go cold turkey on all caffeine. And while for the first few days it did feel weird and I was hungry in the morning, after a week or so, it's been completely fine. And I'm actually glad I'm off the caffeine now, because while it tastes delicious, it's not a feeling I always want to rely on. And what I have done instead is, because I do enjoy going to a particular local coffee shop in West London on a Saturday morning, it's almost become a bit of a ritual. So I have a decaf there. So there's always a little bit of caffeine in the decaf, but just to keep that ritual up, I'm okay with having a decaf on a Saturday morning. So outside the improvements of sleep quantity, I've also focused on improving the quality. And I've done this by a few different things. The first is wearing blue light blockers for 60 to 90 minutes before bedtime. You may look like Harry Potter, especially the ones that I have, which could not turn me on, and which turns out are actually for women. So thank you, Kunal, for that. Second is switching to a light alarm clock instead of using my phone. Now, while I don't use my phone in the morning, I do have a bad habit of checking my phone all the way up till the moment I sleep. So by using an alarm clock, I'm actually now able to leave my phone downstairs and out of the bedroom. So I do get that period where I have no choice but to not look at my phone and just be off all screens before bedtime. That's made a big difference. And the third is actually to wake up a little bit later at 6 a.m. And in order to get my full 8 hours, I now wake up at 6 a.m. versus what I was doing for years, which was between 5 and 5:30. And it took a while mentally to break this barrier because I was thinking, oh, I'm lazy, or I should be waking up earlier. But what's funny is I'm actually feeling so much more productive and alive by waking up at 6 a.m. instead of forcing the 5 a.m. I was doing for so long. And to ensure that I don't counter the benefits of sleeping more by ultimately working later, sleeping later, I've actually kept my sleep and work cutoff times the exact same. So that's made a big difference. And I'm sure the 5 a.m. could be done and still get the 8 hours, but it'll mean getting into bed at a time which doesn't really fit with my life socially. So sleeping 10 till 6 is working really well. And I'll see how it goes. If I do need to wake up earlier, I will change it. But for now, I'm going to continue riding this because, let's be honest, who doesn't mind sleeping in for a bit? Number 5, managing my mental energy units. So the second catalyst to improving my quality of energy has been better management of my mental energy units. I learned this year that we all have a finite number of mental energy units, and that the more intense and engaging and high value the task is, the faster your MEUs diminish. Now, I didn't understand this for a while until R&T coach, the hitman, Nathan, likened the way I was operating as high volume, high intensity training. He said I was doing DC training, which, if you haven't heard about, is one of the most high intense protocols out there. And he likened it to doing DC training twice a day, every day. And I thought that analogy hit the nail on the head. So as a result, I'm much more aware now of the tasks and the projects I'm spending my time on. So I'm conscious that if a project I take on is worth 5 MEUs, I can't treat it the same time value as an admin task only worth 1 MEU. And for a long time, I didn't make this differentiation. It was only when I started actually writing the book that I realized that 2 hours of focused, strategic creativity felt the same, if not more draining, as doing 6 hours of admin work that I was previously accustomed to earlier in the year before we had any real team. So just to make this more clear, if we only have 10 units of energy per day to do productive work, I was treating every task project that I was doing as 1 MEU, when in reality, even if something takes the same time as something else, that task can take up so many more MEUs. And if you're constantly zapping your MEUs every day, you're going to flirt with that red line a hell of a lot more. So managing this has been a big one for me, and it's meant more ruthless calendar management and adopting more of an essentialist behavior in things I choose to do. Number 6 is understanding my wiring. So because of all of the above, because of all of the points I've mentioned just now, I've been diving a lot deeper into my own inner wiring. I've been asking myself why I push myself the way I do, why I'm always on, why I struggle to celebrate the small wins, why I always strive for more. And for a period of this year, I started to think there was a problem and that I was doing and that what I was doing and how I was wired was an issue I needed to solve. So I decided to explore this a lot in different forms of therapy, journaling, and conversations with people who are either complete opposite or are that exact type A, high-performing, constantly pushing person. And I thought the answer lied in a number of things, from balance, dealing with childhood experiences or memories, or in finding a completely new path. Maybe this wasn't for me, or maybe this isn't the right path for me. And while I still don't know the exact answer, the best learning has actually been to accept that, and to accept that this is who I am. This is how I'm wired. This is how I'm designed and who I'm meant to be. That I'm here to create, to produce, to build. And if I don't live in this state of being, I don't feel great, nor am I living true to myself. Because ultimately, I love the feel of pushing myself on my own accord. And I now appreciate that I feel best when I'm living in my flow, which I'll come on to later. And that flow, and part of that flow means being creative and producing. So this has been an interesting learning to reflect on. And it's one that I'm sure I'll come onto more and more in 2020. Because for a lot of this year, I battled whether I needed to change, or that everything I'm doing is potentially for the wrong reasons. Like, for example, am I trying to prove a point? Or am I doing it to please someone else? But after exploring all these different outcomes or reasons or answers, and as of recording this podcast, I actually feel completely content and grateful for the wiring I have, because it allows me to create an impact. And then there's a lot to be said for the impact that this wiring is creating. So what I'm doing instead is, instead of looking at all the downsides and thinking that there's something wrong, I'm just looking at plugging the holes and putting in strategies to prevent the downsides that may come with this wiring. So this has been a really interesting learning, and it's been a lot of deep diving into myself, understanding myself more. And I've come out at the end of the year with a much firmer understanding of my wiring. And the best thing of it all is now I accept it, and I'm actually very grateful for it. And that's been a big game changer in itself, because it's helped ease the pressure a lot in trying to find a solution, if that makes any sense. Number 7 is my evolving why and definition of success. So in almost all my reflective pieces that I've written about in the past, I've always discussed my why and my definition of success to some degree. And I touched on this on my solo podcast as well last time. And what I've learned is that this is always going to evolve and grow as I go through the different seasons of life. And when I think about the evolution so far of my definition of success, it's gone from doing what I love to being able to work from anywhere, anytime, to having freedom, to being able to live a life of my own choosing. And I've spent this year really dialing into this, and I've learned that it's a mix of all of the above to a certain degree. With this year in particular being all about living in my flow. And during the grind period of my shoot this year, with the introspection that it brings, I identified some of the core flow states that I feel most fulfilled and successful within. Back in that article that I wrote on the grind phase and the learnings I had, I identified 4 key pillars. But since then, I've refined it to 3. First is creativity. The second is connection. And the third is self-care. And what I've learned is so long as I strive to live my days filled with creativity, and by this I mean writing, coaching, strategizing, filled with deep, meaningful connection with family and friends, and lots of self-care, meaning training, sleeping, eating well, journaling, walking. And in the case of self-care, I mean mentally, physically, emotionally, all aspects. As long as I'm doing those three things, I'm successful. And that's been a very interesting insight I've gained into myself as well, in that when I identify these perfect days or these perfect states, or when I'm living in my flow, that's when I feel most fulfilled, feel very successful, and feel overall very content. So that's been a great learning. And I've also learned a lot about money. And money is an interesting one because it doesn't drive me in any way. And working hard has never been about the money. Anyone will know that I live a very frugal existence, in that I don't really spend much and don't have expensive taste. So what I do has never been about the money, and it's always come from an internal drive, which I've discussed earlier on in terms of my wiring. But what I do value from money is the security that it can bring, and especially the ability to then create and produce whether it's content, coaching, methods, or anything, creating and producing without fear. So the security money can bring is that it can allow creation without fear. And there's a lot to be said for that. And the second is the security that it can bring for being an active father for my future family. So that's another big part of it. Which then brings me on to my why. And this can be split into two roles. So the first is as a coach, and the second for why I work. And as a coach, it's simple, and it hasn't changed for a decade. Everyone knows, or if you've listened to this podcast or you've been following the blog for a while, you'll know that the reason I started training was as a 17-year-old skinny fat kid with moobs and a pot belly, and I wanted to improve my self-confidence and help alleviate the insecurities I had around being the 17-year-old skinny fat kid. And I've experienced this firsthand in myself and thousands of clients we worked with over the years, the power transforming your body has to be a vehicle for the greater good in your life. And at the level of self-confidence, focus, control it can bring into your life is something I believe everyone should experience, which is why it's firmly part of the mission and vision of everything we do at RNT. And this is my why as a coach, in that I want everyone to experience this powerful vehicle for themselves. My personal bigger why is a little different, and I started speaking about this on my solo podcast last time, which is episode 93. And it ultimately boils down to three things at the moment. First is self-mastery. And what I found out about myself is that I use business, coaching, training as vehicles for me to learn more about myself, how hard I can push, and to provide an opportunity to master my craft. The second is autonomy, and it's being able to live my ideal day. And that's something very important to me. And it's why within the team itself, we stress the importance of lifestyle, mental and physical health, and crafting a life by design. So even for all of our team members, I place a huge emphasis on finding the structure, strategy, and system that works for them in their lifestyle so that they can work productively and live effectively according to how they want to do it, which is a freedom that I don't think many professions can cater for, and I'm very grateful for that. The third is future family, and it's interesting that the more I journal about my why, the more this continues to crop up. So that's something to keep an eye on more in 2020 and beyond. Number 8, my role in the company has changed. So as we've grown as a company, my role has completely changed. Up till May, I was doing absolutely everything in the business. But as of recording this podcast, most of my day is geared towards what I'm doing, what I'm best at. And I'm now lucky enough to be part of a team that excels at what I'm not good at and or don't enjoy. And this makes us so much better placed to serve our clients as a result of it. And at the start of 2019, I thought I could throw time at any problem. But I've learned that over the course of the year, that the best use of my time is actually to focus on my unique 5%, which is creating, strategy, and coaching, and empower the team to effectively manage everything else. And this has been personally one of my biggest wins for the year, as it's allowed us to operate and grow into a properly functioning business where we have defined roles, KPIs, strategy, and accountability across the board. And so this shift in my role has been a complete 180 from this time last year. And what's funny is this time last year, the whole business was run on Gmail still. I still had a personal Gmail account I was using, which I look back and I still can't see how we were doing it for so long. And it took so long to transition to a proper RNT fitness email. But it just goes to show how far we've come this year, which is awesome to reflect back on. But the fact that up till May I was doing everything else and now I'm able to focus on where I can add the most value to the team has been a real big win for me. Number 9, writing a book is brutally difficult but rewarding. So without transitioning my own role within the company, I wouldn't have been able to start work on our RNT book. And now that I'm at the editing stage, I found a completely newfound respect for authors, because writing is no easy task and it demands a lot of time and quality energy. And over the time, it can become very mentally draining, especially when you don't necessarily hit writer's block, but you write certain bits and they just don't sit well with you. And when they don't sit well with you, they linger in your head all day long. And that lingering can really start to weigh on you and drain up those MEUs. That said, it is incredibly rewarding and it's been one of the best projects I've ever worked on. So to say I'm excited about launching the book in May 2020 is an understatement. This book is going to be like nothing else in the health and fitness market, and I can't wait to spread the word about it. We are going to defy a lot of beliefs around how to stay in the shape of your life for life. And it's going to be a book that asks a lot of questions about you and will force a lot of introspection that will allow you to truly transform. So I'm super excited about releasing this book in the first half of the year. Number 10, the competitive advantage of thinking time. So through writing the book and reaching many roadblocks that I've discussed along the way, so those lingering paragraphs that may not sit well with you, or whether this case study should go there, or whether this section should even be included. Through all these roadblocks, I've learned that one of the best or one of the greatest competitive advantages we can have is thinking time and being deliberate about carving it into our days. I personally do this in 2 ways. The first is with my journal in the early hours of the morning, where I'll ponder on a specific strategy or problem with nothing else but a pen and paper for at least 20 minutes. The second is through my unplugged walks, where often I'll start the walk with a problem in mind. And then I'll use that time when I walk to just play with the idea and just see what comes with it. Because I've realized there's something to be said for unlocking more creativity and problem solving when your body is in automatic motion, because it allows you to step away and see the forest for the trees. And I get this when I do walking, or even if I'm training sometimes, I'll just get a flood of ideas coming through because I train with my phone on airplane mode. And during those rest periods where I'm just walking around the gym, ideas will be coming to me without forcing it. So sometimes you just need to step away in order to see what's really in front of you. And unplugged walks, journaling, and time just spent in solitude can make a massive difference. Number 11, old mistakes will always come back to bite you. So I've made a lot of mistakes in my time, but this year has taught me in particular that old mistakes will always come back to bite you. And they'll come back to bite you hard. You see, in the early days of RNT, fueled by overly enthusiastic entrepreneurialism, I made a series of mistakes that have cost me dearly over 2 years later. And I learned this year that I can't rewrite past mistakes. And even if it hurts to admit it, taking ownerships of these mistakes and moving forward is always the best recipe. And the key lesson from this is to be grateful for the mistake, see the opportunity in it, and to never make it again. Number 12, always sleep on it. So I got into a bad habit this year of making important decisions at the end of the day, or worse yet, reacting to a decision close to bedtime without thinking it through. And not only is this a bad time to make decisions because your decision-making ability is poor, but it's impossible to think rationally. At the end of the day, your willpower is zapped, your MEUs are fried, and the likelihood of making a mistake is always going to be higher. In fact, the mistakes I'm referring to in the previous point, a lot of them actually came when I was in a sleep-deprived, energy-deprived, end-of-the-day state. So there definitely is a linking there. Now, if you couple all those issues, so willpower being zapped, MEUs being fried, with reacting versus responding, it's a quick recipe for disaster. So the lesson I've learned here is always sleep on it and come back to it the next day. You're always going to be much fresher and make a better decision accordingly. Number 13, it's been a year of 4 quarters. So as a business, we went through 4 key phases this year. Quarter 1 was what I'm calling the storm. Quarter 2 was a period of systemizing. Quarter 3 was about scaling. And quarter 4 was settling or settle. The storm phase was all about when I was doing absolutely everything. So it was a period of time where I was every hat in the business. We were growing, but I was redlining on a regular basis and completely burnt out. I mean, the first collapse episode I had in February, that came 6 weeks into the year, where it was literally wake up in the morning, at the laptop at 5:30, close the laptop at 10 p.m., sleep, back to it, and repeat. And I was just trying to find the time to do everything in the day, which eventually caught up with me and forced me to create new roles and bring on people to help. That was the storm phase. The systemized phase that came next was the absolute game changer. Because at the start of the year, I agreed to go off the grid for 4 days completely on a Cambodian island called Koh Rong, where we were going to have no access to Wi-Fi, no screens, no access to Wi-Fi. So I decided to make it no screens, no connection to the outside world, and go completely off the grid. Now, up until then, I'd never taken a day off since starting RNT. So the idea of going completely off screens for 4 days meant something had to change. And this created massive accountability to build the systems and a back-end team into the business in order to allow it to continue operating smoothly. And agreeing to the 4-day off-the-grid period may have been one of the best decisions I made this year, as it changed the entire operations of the business. In order to make this happen, and in order to effectively implement these operational changes, we shut the doors for any new clients at the start of May for 12 weeks. And we kept them shut until we entered the scale phase. And the scale phase was marked by the famous breaking the internet day of 14th of July, where the whole website crashed. And it was that Sunday morning where everything just went mental. And it's one of my favorite days of the year for just the craziness that went into it, from the website crashing to the team working into overdrive, and all around really fun day, that taught us a lot. But this 4-day off the grid period really was a game changer, and it's allowed me to now do the weekly 22s, to stop work after dinner, because it built systems into the business that we didn't previously had, and it allowed us to bring on a team to facilitate this happening. So the scale phase in Q3 was only possible because of our new team and systems, and this period of the year led to 4 new coaches coming on board and 2 sellout intakes for July and September. Since then, we've been in a settle phase, whereby we've been able to normalize, tweak our systems further, and refine the process. And this phase has brought some rhythm back into the business. And I wouldn't even say back into the business, it's brought rhythm into the business, because we didn't have this before. And it's allowed us to reflect on 2019, strategize for 2020, and think about where we want to go, how we want to go from good to great in all aspects, with the key focus being on our culture, coaching, and systems. Number 14, you have to shed the skin with each step change. So whether it's in the systems, service providers, team members, or even the way you think, I've learned that with each step change we've made as a business, we've had to shed all of the old skin. And what I've found is that there are specific tipping points along the journey where we've had to break the business in order to find the solution to go to the next level. And what I've learned is that what may work great for us or for you, what may work great for you up to a certain point can be quickly rendered below par at the next. Now, this has been a fun challenge to embrace, and it's really forced us to level up across the board, because we've had to be better in our expectations, in our service, our systems. And each time we make that step change, we've had to level up. Number 15, I must plan my weeks in advance, but only 60 to 70% of it. So I used to always feel overwhelmed on the weekends with everything I need to do during the week ahead. I used to keep it in my head. There was no real structure about it. And I wake up on Monday morning and just go. And this was a behavior I had to shed the skin of in order to continue thriving into 2019. And it's now very different. I don't start the weekend until I've planned for my following week. And I'll spend time every Friday blocking out my diary in different calendar colors and have a top 5 hit list to work my way through, which will be very strictly focused on moving the business forward. And as I adopted this practice throughout the year, it was going great. And then I started to feel overwhelmed again, which is when I realized I was over planning. So what I was doing is I was blocking out every single possible slot in my diary with no room to breathe in case life cropped up, which, as you'll know, it always does. And so now what I do is I only block out 70% at the absolute max and leave a buffer for any inevitable life events that may crop up. And by doing that, it's eased the pressure a lot and has made me feel a lot less overwhelmed when going into my weeks. Number 16, you can never have too much clarity. So clarity is king. And one of my personal 2020 goals is to be crystal clear in all my communications and expectations. I learned the hard way this year that a lack of clarity creates confusion, distrust, and animosity, and can cloud over an otherwise healthy relationship. In the latter half of this year, I've tried to correct this with an aim to always be clear on expectations, never assume, always follow up, and to ensure that there's agreement on both sides when starting something new. Number 17, you have to go through the 5 phases to be in the shape of your life for life. Now, this year we created a level of clarity in our unique methodologies by formalizing the 5 phases of the R&T transformation journey. It's changed our approach to coaching and allowed our clients to see the journey ahead of them at all times, which I think has made a massive difference in not only their results in the short term, but how they've transferred that into a long-term lifestyle solution. And having worked with so many people along different stages of this journey, we've learned as a team that if you want to be in the shape of your life for life, you have to be willing to go through all 5 phases. You can't skip phases. You can't do phases in different orders, because each phase interlinks and feeds off each other and teaches you something about yourself that you can carry over to the next phase and build on going forwards. Number 18, the importance of meal hygiene. So meal hygiene is something I've taken for granted before this year. I've always taken for granted in that I've always been a slow eater. I've always chewed my food, and I've always been someone who's engaged in conversation over dinner instead of being so focused on just finishing my plate as fast as possible. This year we started to talk a lot about meal hygiene, and it surprised me to learn just how much of a missing piece this was for people. And I couldn't believe the simple practice of chewing your food 20 to 30 times, putting your cutlery down between bites, and taking at least 20 minutes to eat could be so transformative. In fact, if you want to be in the shape of your life for life, adopting meal hygiene is one of the best things you can do. And if there's any habit you're looking to start in 2020, healthy meal hygiene would be one of them. Number 19, 12 in 12 is hard work. So I had a goal this year to do 12 trips in 12 months. And I was warned by multiple people at the beginning that this wasn't going to be an easy feat. But I thought I'd give it a go anyway. But I've learned, as of recording this, that they were right. Because after 10 trips, I'd had enough. While I thoroughly enjoyed all of the trips, when I got back from Kenya after the seminar at the start of November, I was just craving that long-term routine and a month off from visiting an airport, which, for those of you who do it for work on a bi-weekly, weekly, even twice a week basis for it, I just don't know how you do it. And I was just craving that long-term routine that I really thrive off. So this year, to recap, I traveled to Paris, Mumbai, Reykjavik, Sorrento, Barcelona, Thailand, of which I did 3 different places, Cambodia, 3 different places, California, New York, and Nairobi. So 10 different trips, of which some of them had multiple places within it. So during this year, I also ticked off a big bucket list item, which was to spend 1 month working from Southeast Asia, which I managed to do in June during our systemized phase. So this was a cool bucket list item to tick off. And next year, I plan to travel a lot less and enjoy more of what London and UK has to offer. But what's interesting when I reflected on the 10 trips I had is that 75% of these were all done in the first half of the year, which is why in my most recent quarterly insights, again, which I'll link into the show notes, I mentioned that some of my travel was actually a form of escapism from the intensity of the storm phase we were in as a business earlier on in the year. And because of the intensity of it and the constant redlining, I was almost using trips away to take myself out of that environment and detach from it. And it was only once we came out of the systemized phase and more into the settle phase, in that the tendency or the urge to travel has actually been a lot less. And that's been an interesting comparison, actually. Number 20, and the final one, is I can grow a half-decent beard. So this one is a little bit more of a lighter one. But in September 2018, I decided I was finally going to grow a beard under the guidance of Mr. K-Mac. And lo and behold, I managed to grow a half-decent one, and I can't see myself going back. I'm going to post this picture in the top 20 things learnt article, which will be in the show notes. So go check it out and let me know if you think this is the best transformation of 2019. So just some closing thoughts and some thoughts on 2020. 2019 was the last year of the decade, and I'm really excited for what 2020 has in store for us. It marks 10 years in the industry for me, which is why releasing the book next year on RNT's 30th anniversary is going to be extra special. On a personal note, 2019 has been hugely introspective and growth-inducing, especially the bits about my wiring has been a revelation in itself. And I plan to take a lot of the learnings I've had this year into 2020 with the goals to be more kind to myself, to celebrate more of the small wins, and to continue to focus on having quality energy for my loved ones. And just to finish up on here, I'm going to break each of those 3 objectives down and how I plan to do it. So how I'm going to be more kind to myself is play the long game more in how I allocate my time, to not feel like I'm on a constant rush, and don't feel guilty about taking my time with things a bit more. Sleep more and prioritize mental self-care a lot higher. Take those 24 hours off, or 22 hours off per week. Continue to stop work after dinner, and keep an eye on my toggle timer when I think I'm flirting with the red line. So that's going to be a big one. How will I celebrate the small wins? One practice I started doing towards the end of this year was actually a monthly journal on the wins I've had for the month. And this was actually a really cool exercise to do. So for any of you who share a similar personality trait, one thing I'd recommend is on the last day of the month, on the last Friday, book out an hour or so, get your journal out, and just reflect on all the achievements you've made in the month that have just gone past and what you're looking forward to in the next month. Because if you do share a similar personality, it can be easy to finish a month and just think nothing's really changed or nothing's really been done. But taking the time to just slow down, reflect on some of the wins can make a big difference in how you feel. Build in more rewards into these small wins, and these rewards don't need to be monetary or material. They can be as simple as taking a weekend off, or it could be going for my favorite steak. These are some things I'm just playing with and will continue to play with during 2020. And the third is, how will I have more quality energy for loved ones? Just going to recap on some of the points I made earlier, which is prioritizing self-care, looking at my toggle, sleeping 8 hours a night, doing my weekly 22, stopping work at dinner, managing my MEUs through the week, and learning to say no to draining tasks. So combination of those should help me continue to bring quality energy. And those are very much my 3 personal objectives that I'm bringing into 2020, which will be the foundation of everything else I do. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode of RNT Fitness Radio. This will be the last episode of 2019. So I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone who's tuned in to the podcast in 2019, has helped spread the word, and has enjoyed some of the brilliant interviews and conversations we've had on the podcast. Super excited to see where the podcast goes in 2020. And on that note, Happy New Year and all the best for the year ahead. I'll speak to you in the new year. Thank you so much for being here today on this episode of RNT Fitness Radio. I'd love for you to do a quick little favor for us. Please head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating, leave a comment, and share it with your family and friends. If you're interested in learning more about how to transform your body and positively change your life, go to www.rntfitness.com and explore all our free content on offer. Thank you.